Good morning, everyone. I'm Sarah Townsend, editor of Place Northwest. Welcome to this dedicated event on the region's industrial and logistics sector. This is one of the hottest property topics of the moment. Demand for regional logistics space is reaching fever pitch, but a pressing land shortage and less than helpful central government approach to industrial planning is threatening to derail several large schemes. Still, as we'll discuss today, the sector has vast potential to drive economic growth, and it is up to all of us in the room to communicate that and grasp the opportunities with both hands. So first, I'd like to thank our sponsors today. We've got JMW Solicitors, AEW Architects, and Lexington Communications. There are 180 people registered today, which is fantastic and shows the level of interest in the sector. A quick bit of housekeeping for those of you less familiar with Remo. The networking opportunity is the big difference when compared with other platforms such as Zoom. So please do create your own profile so that when someone clicks on you, they can read who you are and what you do. Also, don't be shy, turn on your cameras and let people see you. To move around the room, just double click on a table and you'll be taken straight there where you can video chat with other guests. There's also private messaging through the chat button, and of course the Q&A function where you can direct questions to your panelists that will weave into the discussion. This is really your chance to put your views across, seek advice and air concerns that you're facing at the moment as sort of industry experts and practitioners. So don't hold back, keep those questions coming and I'll move through as many of them as I can in the time available. Today's event is split into 2 sessions and there's a networking break in between and a further half hour of networking at the end so you can carry on making contacts and doing business. So without further ado, let's kick off. First of all, we've got a presentation by Lisa Harris, Executive Director of Place at St Helens Council, which has got a lot of exciting industrial schemes on its plate at the moment. The regeneration of Parkside Colliery and Haydock Point Employment Park, to name just a couple. So I think Lisa's going to show us a bit about what's going on and sort of just how important the sector is really to sort of local economic growth in the St Helens area. So over to you, Lisa, if you could turn your camera on if you haven't already.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much, and hello everybody. Welcome to today. I've got a short presentation for you. So if the technology allows, let me see if this works. Right. So I just want today to tell you a little bit about St Helens and about some of our industry and our logistics opportunities that we have. But first of all, I think it's always important to know a little bit about the heart of a place. And St Helens is a significant borough at the heart of the northwest of England. And we've got a very much an industrial revolution heritage as a centre for innovation in glassmaking, chemical production and pharmaceuticals, with a birthplace of brands such as Beecham's and Pilkington's. So there's a lot more that you probably don't know about us. Right, innovation is in our blood in St Helens and we're perfectly positioned at the heart of the northwest. We are home to the world's first industrial canal and the first locomotive trials were held in Rainhill. And St Helens has and always will be an innovative place to do business. We are in a prime position on the national motorway and rail network and less than 30 minutes from the port of Liverpool and 40 minutes from Manchester Airport. We have a market of over 35 million people within just a few hours' drive. We sit at the heart of the northwest, the Atlantic Gateway and the Superport initiatives, all key drivers of growth within the north. The Liverpool City region has recently been identified as a future free port, and St Helens features Parkside as a tax and customs site, bringing real advantage to businesses looking for a new home. We're already home to many logistics companies and some of the biggest names in food and retail distribution. We have manufacturing and industry in our DNA, and there are many opportunities for large and small companies. An example of this is phase 2 of the Gerrard Park development by Northern Trust. The scheme is 35,000 foot of small light industrial units, helped to come to fruition with just over £1 million from the Liverpool City Region Single Investment Industrial Fund. And it's a great example of the abundance and choice in the borough, with an industrial workforce on your doorstep. 3.4 million people live within an hour's drive for St Helens, meaning that your business can access people with the right skills. And we have lofty ambitions. Sarah mentioned the challenges of planning, but we are striving ahead and in St Helens, and we look for our local plan, which will go before inspectors in May, will be the next step in making those ambitions become a reality. We're at the heart of the M6 growth corridor and looking to bring forward 265 hectares of employment land for development. We have a wide variety of employment sites, ranging in size, with Parkside at 144 hectares being our largest opportunity, with both road and rail connectivity. Parkside, a former colliery on the M6 corridor, and with a new £40 million road infrastructure, will be the perfect location for industry and logistics. The first phase is ready to go, pending a decision on planning, and we know that it will kickstart the rest of the 79 hectares to come forward. And as we all know, appetite in the market is very healthy at the moment. The Council and Langtree are ready to invest almost £78 million in construction, and the first phase will bring forward 93,000 square metres of new employment floor space, and many other benefits, including £80 million a year of economic activity to the city region and 1,330 new operational jobs. But another example of things happening in St Helens is Glass Futures, a global centre of research and development for the glass industry. A centre of excellence that will enable companies across the glass industry and academia to work together in collaboration, a first of its kind in the world. The facility will deliver the industry and government-backed research and development projects aimed at reducing the carbon footprint of glass production. The facility will contain a 30-tonne per day experimental furnace that will provide a platform for industry to test and trial short commercial runs. The faculty will be occupied and managed by Glass Futures, a not-for-profit organisation, and members include Guardian Glass, NSERC and Siemens. The building will be leased by St Helens Council, and we utilise public funding from across UKRI and the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. The site consists of two phases. The first will be produce 30 tonnes of glass research capability per day, with phase 2 introducing 150 tonne per day mini float line. The site will demonstrate new technologies and test new low carbon fuels. It's a £54 million investment rooted in our motto of growing back greener. Granted Get Britain building funding in August 2020, we have made a theory become a reality in what feels like a matter of weeks. By working as a true collaboration, we've been able to identify a site, secure match funding, resolve legal agreements and submit planning applications by January this year. Planning is due to be considered in May, and if successful, we will be on site by late summer, with a production commencing at the site by 2023. I think that demonstrates that when you put our mind to it, we really can make things happen quickly. But St Helens is a great place for all kinds of businesses. With low overheads and a wide variety of business options available, we have something to suit everyone. With good digital connectivity that is set to become great, our local network will soon be able to offer fibre to premises in all areas of the borough. And with connectivity to the Liverpool City Region Superspine, we really are ready for the next generation of businesses. But what about your workforce? St Helens offers a plethora of places to call home, from sleepy villages to suburban housing developments. We boast outstanding schools, colleges and even a university. With two major cities on the doorstep, as well as beautiful countryside and urban green spaces, why wouldn't St Helens be the educated choice for you to locate to? And the beauty of St Helens is we have something for everyone. We're home to the world famous rugby league team Saints. The club play out of the Totally Wicked Stadium that offers truly motivational conference facilities for all we can all meet again in person. But we're not just about rugby. We have so much more to offer. We're also home to Haydock Park, a racecourse that boasts both flat and jump horse racing, if you fancy a flutter. Or if dancing is more your thing, then there is a host of many top-class music acts, which I'm sure we're all craving to see live. And if you're a water enthusiast, then head to Carmill Dam, the largest body of water in Merseyside, which plays host to powerboat racing and many more water activities. But don't take my word for it. Here are just a few of the household names in this sector that St Helens calls home. And during the pandemic, we've helped all of those to continue to trade as much as possible. And if you're anything like me, when people mention numbers, my brain just goes fuzzy. But here are just a few of the numbers that St Helens is an interesting place to do business in. We're only 20 minutes from Liverpool and Manchester city centres. We've got 35 million people within 4 hours drive of us. We've got 100,000 students and 12 university and colleges within half an hour. We're only 2 minutes to the M6 and the M62 on the West Coast Main Line as well. And we have 8,000 new homes to be built. And we have 3 million workforce within 1 hour's drive. But probably most relevant to today's presentation is that we have 375,000 square metres of potential logistics and industrial developments to be developed or under construction. But St Helens the Place isn't the only thing that's going through a transformation. We recognise there are many roles we can play to help businesses succeed. We are partners with Langtree in Parkside, helping to guide the development and bring it to the market. We are landlords for Glass Futures, helping fledgling global business to take root in St Helens. We are providers of the right infrastructure to facilitate investment and make doing business here as easy as possible. And we are here to help you with recruitment and training tailored specifically to your requirements. We will provide a single point of contact who will take the bureaucracy and red tape out of the process for you. We want to help you to grow in as green a way as possible. But most importantly, we're here to help in any way we can. I've only been in St Helens for a short period of time, but it's already adopted me as one of their own, a place of warm, proud and industrious people. I'm 100% confident that there's an amazing future where I hope many of you will be part of. Thank you for listening today. And I'm going to hand you back over to Sarah.
Thanks so much for that. Really good overview of the council's priorities and some really good detail as well on project plans such as Glass Futures and the Parkside Colliery regeneration and really, the overall potential of the sector. So I think that's a good starting point for our first panel discussion, which is going to be about the outlook for Northwest logistics in 2021 and beyond. So we're going to be talking about how to seize regional opportunities in industrial property and what trends are likely to influence the sector in the year and beyond. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Rob Taylor, I see is already there. Thank you, Rob. Partner, National Logistics and Industrial at Cushman & Wakefield.
Morning.
Burnett, Development Director of Network Space. Karen Hurst, Managing Director of Maple Grove Developments, and of course Lisa Harris, Executive Director of Place St Helens Council. And to our audience, please do remember to submit questions through the Q&A button and we'll work those into our overall conversation with all of our panellists. So I'd like to start with you, Rob, if that's okay. Cushman's done a lot of recent research on the Northwest's industrial sector. And I'm sure you've got some really good observations and figures about where the market is headed in the coming year. So what are your sort of key observations at the moment?
Well, obviously, 2020 was all about the take-up stats, which broke new ground as far as not just the Northwest, but nationally is concerned. Take-up for units over 50,000 square foot in the Northwest last year was north of 5 million square feet, which is new territory. And we've seen already, we're just finalising our stats for Q1 this year, as you'd expect, but it's looking like take up for the first quarter of this year in that same size bracket is probably going to be over 2 million square feet already, which is, extremely encouraging for the regional industrial market. That's had the added effect of seeing rental growth. So whereas if we probably went back 3 or 4 years, headline rents for buildings of 100,000 square foot plus were probably somewhere around the low 60s a square foot. I think SIG were the first to pay £6 a square foot in Trafford Park. We're now seeing deals being agreed at north of £7 a square foot on buildings over 100,000 square feet. So I think that the tone of rents on that big box market is going to be £7 a square foot plus. We're hearing rumours that there are proposals that have gone out at that sort of level on some of the stuff that's coming out of the ground at the moment. What we didn't see last year in that 5 million square feet plus that we had in the Northwest, which other regions saw, was Amazon really doing very much in the Northwest. Can't comment too much on it, but it's looking highly likely that in the first 3, 4, 5 months of this year, I think they will probably be responsible for a large part of the take-up in the Northwest. So they're definitely expanding in this region. They're expanding nationally, and that tells the story that e-commerce, all that sort of stuff has been what's really been fueling the logistics take-up over the last 12, 18 months. And we see no signs really of that slowing down. There's other new aspects into the industrial market that we are starting to see. So we're seeing occupiers wanting lots of power for both automation, but also for vehicle charging, that sort of thing. We're also seeing occupiers such as the vertical farming coming into the market. That's a new, totally new area that is coming in, that we're seeing take up for. We're seeing dark kitchens, the likes of Gusto, for example, as well, taking space over in Warrington. HelloFresh have taken space elsewhere in the UK. So the pandemic has really sort of accelerated what was already coming, probably 5 years ahead of where we were expecting it to be at. Everybody's kind of approach to online commerce, how they do their shopping, etc., has changed. We've also seen new entrants to that market. So there was a certain demographic of person, so let's say my father's age, who would have turned their nose up at the idea of doing online retail. They simply had to embrace that through the pandemic, and they have done that. And it's highly unlikely that demographic, much of it, will reverse that trend. I think they will continue, having seen the benefits of it, they will continue to embrace that. So we'll continue to see industrial development through the Northwest and through the UK. The big issue that we have got in the Northwest, I suppose the cargo ship in the Suez, if you want to reference it, is the hold up with these sites, which Lisa touched upon before, that have been called in by the Secretary of State. Parkside Collieries, Lisa's mentioned, Wingates and Symmetry Park in Wigan. We wait and see what the outcome of the decisions on those is, but I'm pretty confident that had that not happened, and had they been allowed to be brought forward for development last year and into the early part of this year, there would have been stuff up, built and let on all three of those schemes. So that is going to have an impact on supply moving forward through 2021 and into 2022. Last week, we saw Stockport Council reject Quorum's application at Bredbury Gateway. So that's obviously going to hold that up whilst they appeal on that front. And we've seen other sites getting called in, like the Amiga extension, which is also in St Helens. And we've seen things like PLP, Haydock also get rejected. So admittedly, they're schemes that impact on Greenbelt. And as you know, Sarah, I've already said I'm no Victorian industrialist. I don't necessarily want vast swathes of concrete being put all over our countryside, but there is a real strain now on opportunities for future employment land. And I think we're going to have to see some of that Greenbelt land taken up by urban logistics and by distribution. It's going to have to be the case, and in some respects, by doing that, and this point was made by the leaders on the GMSF, by doing that, you can actually protect Greenbelt for the future by sort of properly defining exactly what is Greenbelt and exactly what is allowed to be used for employment space. You take Stockport as an example. There is just really now no opportunity for large-scale brownfield logistics development in that borough. A lot of the brownfield sites have been taken up by Resi, so there is going to have to be some take back from Greenbelt. I think it's almost inevitable if they're going to be able to invest and take advantage of this boom in our sector. So in summary, it's been a fantastic 12 months actually, and there really is no signs that this is going to slow down at all over the next 9 to 12 months. The slight caveat to that being, we've all got to find a home for these occupiers, and unfortunately, stock levels are dwindling, and there's this bit of a hold up in terms of getting new sites moved forward.
Thanks so much, Rob. Really, really helpful overview. And just before we move on to the other panelists, on the called in schemes at the moment, just to give our audience a bit of context if they're unfamiliar, I'm sure most people are, but unfamiliar with the exact sort of scale of those schemes that are coming forward. What's the total square footage then that's being held up at the market at the moment then, as a result of those? And, you said that if they'd actually been able to progress, some of that space would have actually entered the market and been mopping up some of this sort of, latent demand.
I don't know the exact figure off the top of my head, I'll be honest, but I would anticipate it is likely to be, I would have thought, over 3 million square feet of industrial space that's being held up, probably more. If you throw into the mix the likes of the Eddie Stobart shed that got rejected at Warrington South. So several million square feet is the answer, Sarah. So, it is a not insignificant future supply.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thanks for that, Rob. Okay, Karen, as a developer, what's your experience of the market, on the schemes that you're working on at the moment? Perhaps you can give our audience a very brief overview of some of the key projects that you've got on your sort of radar at the moment, got in your in tray, as it were. And what are you finding as the supply and demand dynamics that are driving growth in the market? Has a lot of what Rob has said has chimed with you?
I think industrial has never been such a hot sector. I'm sure Rob's had one of his best years. I'm not sure some of the retail agents or whatever would feel the same. As a company, we've done industrial development for many years and actually have a property portfolio where there's about a third industrial. And of that, there aren't any voids. And I think with some, there's a waiting list. But I think although on the big box and the logistics that you've touched on, Rob, clearly, we all know e-commerce has just gone mad, accelerated by, sadly, COVID. A lot of the stock that we've done is more small and mid-box. So we did a scheme at Deeside, just in North Wales, which was 3 mid-box units with joint venture with Trebor, supported by Welsh Government, when it was quite challenging to get speculative development to work on the brownfield sites. Total about 85,000 square feet, and actually got it sold during construction to a local business, an owner-occupier, which I think just showed that for them there wasn't that new product that they needed for their business. There was quite a lot of old stock on that estate. We're also have got a site, Artist Park at Winsford, a joint venture with Kia, which again is more the small units, trade counters. We got 3 of those away during construction. There's been a lot of inquiries, but I think there's still some caution with some of those smaller businesses. So there's constantly a flow coming through. But with COVID, obviously, we couldn't do the viewings and things were more challenging with that. But we see that picking up. And we're a quarter of it's let now. And, with the inquiries we've got, we'll soon get to 3/4 let, we're hoping. So our agents are listening. I'm sure they're working hard on that, Leggett Owen and Geraldine. We secured money to support that through the Northwest Evergreen Fund. In fact, it was when Lisa was at Cheshire West and Chester when we were working on that, which is now the Cheshire and Warrington Fund. And we're hoping to announce shortly to start the next phase, which is 3 sort of mid-box units, which, we're hoping with what Rob's saying with demand, that those will let well. A key site which we're very excited on, a bit further up the patch in Lancashire, we're working with Lancashire County Council on a strategic site which actually has been allocated, so that the planning situation isn't the problem there. Looking forward to bringing forward a mixed scheme, working at the moment with them on the revised concept plan. For those who remember, it was where the old where the IKEA was going to go on the site of the M65 motorway. So we think it'll fly out the door. And the challenges we're working through is just the infrastructure as well. I think a number of the sites which have gone well have had the infrastructure in earlier, or the junction's already there with the motorway. So it's just working through those at the moment. But we're looking forward to being able to make some announcements on that hopefully later this year.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Sorry, there's a bit of an echo going on here, isn't there? I hope everyone can hear me all right. On the letting side, Karen, you did mention obviously you're working in the sort of smaller to mid box space, so not necessarily this big box space that that Rob was talking about. But when he mentioned prices and how they're going up, the actual price per square foot, are you seeing that happen then in your sector, or is it still quite stable at the moment? You're saying that some occupiers are quite cautious. Is that kind of keeping the prices?
I think, yeah. On the pricing, I think there is growth in that area as well. I'm sure Rob can substantiate that with deals done and projects we've appraised at. We are getting higher rents. So depending on what it is, some of the trade counters, you're at £8-9 a square foot, and some of the other industrial, depending on the size, is 650, 750. It depends on where you are, because obviously there's a differential in rent if it's prime or secondary locations. Sorry. When I say cautious, it's more, I think a number of businesses have been hit in a way with COVID where they're thinking, do we want to make that next business move, or it might be contract led, and so they're waiting on contracts, whether that's from a manufacturer, from the NHS, whatever. So that's what I'm meaning by the caution. But I think there is still the growth there, and we've definitely seen that in our portfolio. But I think the key thing that's driving the strength of the industrial market and developments, and I think some of the big challenges for developers, which Joe will allude to, is the prices that industrial land is going for. And with the yield compression coming in, rental growth, obviously the demand for the bid box, there's prices of over £1 million an acre, which, I don't think you've ever heard of before in terms of some of that, depending on obviously where that would be for the prime sites. But, often when we bid for sites along with other developers, which have been on the open market, we're on the reserve list. So, it is really challenging trying to find land. They're not making any more land, and it's, Rob alluded to the challenges on some of the sites coming forward that are in the greenbelt.
Sure. Okay. Thanks so much, Karen. Yeah, Joe, I was actually going to ask you this question anyway, actually, that Karen's just alluded to about on the investment side as a developer. We've had a good chat about sort of on the letting side. So can you tell us about some of the projects you're delivering at the moment, and what these high levels of competition that you're facing specifically on the investment side? What challenges is that bringing for you? And I suppose, can you offer any advice to people in the room as to how they can bid successfully for these sites?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Rob has summed up the market really well, and we're seeing a lot to evidence everything that he's kind of talked about, really, and very similar experience to Karen. We're working mainly in the small to mid box sector. We have a number of projects across the northwest at the moment at various stages, varying from sites that we've finished off, built space that we're trying to let up. We've got schemes on site that we're finishing off. And we've got sites that we've just acquired that we're just in the early stages of. So overall, we've delivered about 580,000 square feet over the last 3 years. That's across 5 sites. Some have gone better than others. We've found there's definitely a shortage of supply at the moment that's well reported, and that's driven by the demand that we all know about that's coming from the shift in consumer and retail habits. But I think the pandemic has obviously accelerated that demand over the last year. In our experience, it hasn't all been good. We've had sites that go back a year, we were under offer on, the pandemic hit, and a number of occupiers kind of paused and pulled deals that we had in terms or legals. And it has been a struggle over the last year, I think, on a couple of sites to get people through the door, to get people around. I think people have been waiting in the small to mid box sector on the letting side. I don't think anyone thought the pandemic was going to go on as long as it has, but it does feel like the last sort of 2-3 weeks, those people that have waited are now in a position where they think, right, we've really got to move. And I think there's a renewed confidence as well with the vaccination program, and we have seen a real surge in the last couple of weeks of occupiers coming to view and desperate now for space. So in terms of the investment market, I'd say we've seen that stronger than the occupier market for us. We've had a number of, I've referred earlier to delivering 580,000 square feet. We've sold about 480,000 square feet of that space to investors, and often what has happened is the underbidders on those schemes have approached us to try and get into the process earlier. Disappointed that they've missed out first time round. How can we get involved earlier? Can we forward fund some schemes? Can we buy vacant space? And we've done deals on that basis to a number of investors recently, whereby they're willing to take the risk earlier. And I think that's a trend that we'll continue to see as the market hots up and investors are more and more keen to acquire these properties. We're seeing a lot of money. Obviously, industrials now the safe place to put your cash. Years ago, it may have been retail, but we used to knock down industrial parks to build retail parks, and may start to see that trend shift. I think it's already happening down south, where retail parks are being repurposed for industrial, and I think that's something we may see more of, and that spread across the country. You referred to acquiring sites and how difficult it is, and Karen said the same. That's certainly something that we've had an issue with over recent years. We're fortunate to have a reasonable land bank, but that is getting smaller. So we are in the process of trying to acquire sites and restock the pipeline of developments coming forward. It's a good week for us. Last week was a good week for us because we completed on the acquisition of 3 properties, which total nearly 800 square feet. So that's an investment of over £30 million across those 3 sites. 2 are sort of short-term redevelopment, medium-term redevelopment sites. 1 more of a longer-term investment redevelopment site. Advice to people, I don't want to give away too many of our secrets, but pay more money is what it comes down to. You've got rents really moving on because of demand, yield compression, as Karen referred to earlier, and that's just as a result. Knock-on effect is land prices are soaring. Build costs may start to increase. We start to see some increases in various material costs, and that may just take the heat off some of the land prices in the future. But it is really challenging, and I mean, what we've had to do is think outside the box. So we've acquired a site in Altrincham last week, where obviously Altringham's kind of crying out for new space, and I think the way most people have approached the bid process there was to knock down and start again. But there's a number of buildings, or are a number of buildings on there that are suitable for recycle, repurpose, and as long as the configuration of those buildings isn't detrimental to the sort of configuration and density of the site, then you can do that, and you can therefore drive values, land values, which you really need to do on these sites which are hotly contested.
Well, where's this new money coming from? Sort of new entrants? Is it outside the region? Is it international? Or is it sort of a mix of both?
I don't know. I mean, it's definitely quite a bit of overseas money. I mean, recent deals that we've done have been we did a deal with TPG, US money, and I think we're seeing, just with prime yields down in London being so low, they're getting pushed out of London into the regions, I guess. So a lot of it's moving up through the regions, and we're definitely seeing that in the northwest now.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Joe. Lisa, we've heard your overview of the projects that you're seeing, industrial projects in St Helens. On the sort of the strategic land side, let's look at this sort of issue of land supply. What can you tell us about locations for Northwest industrial property? Are there any emerging new hotspots for development and investment, or is it the sort of traditional industrial heartlands that are still most in demand? And as a sort of linked question to that, Joe, before this event, did mention that his observation was that the Merseyside market had been significantly quieter than other parts of the region, for example, Greater Manchester, in the past 12 months. And I wondered if that observation rang true with you, and whether anything might happen to boost that, maybe the Liverpool Freeport status that we saw earlier this year. That's potentially a big fillip for the city region. So yeah, I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Sarah, I think you're absolutely right. I do think that Freeport will be the jumpstart that we need in the city region, and we find it hugely frustrating that the planning system has stopped a number of sites in Merseyside coming forward, and the majority of those sadly being in St Helens as well. So we've got sites at Parkside, but we've also got Haydock Point and Omega West, two significant sites, in one of which has end users ready to move into. So you can imagine our frustration with the system. We are really confident that we'll get the right decision from the planning system, and we do think that Freeport was a really good indicator, given that we'd identified some of the sites in the Freeport bid, that the decision will be positive. I think Freeport very much will set the Liverpool city region apart from other areas. I think it really, starts to really make the most of our port and that kind of that route in for goods into the country. We do think it's a wide variety of different sites and opportunities across the city region that will be available through Freeport. And the tax and customs incentives that will bring really will, give our sites an edge in the marketplace. As I say, we can just get over that planning hurdle, then I think, we'd be really well placed to bring these to the market. What I would say is that, we're not just leaving that to chance, bringing forward our local plan and kind of making sure that gets ahead, that examination gets ahead, is really important to make sure that we do bring these sites forward no matter what happens with the planning decisions, because I am confident that there is demand there. We do want to create the jobs, and we do have the workforce. And I think we can't underestimate the fact that you mentioned about the fact that is it just industrial heartlands? Well, industrial heartlands are built on our heritage and on our people. We do have people with the right skills in order to actually make these logistics and industrial companies work. So I do think we are the right sites.
Okay, brilliant. I want to come back to the planning issue in a bit and with other panelists, but just briefly, Rob, what's your take on the sort of location question? With your sort of overview of the market, are any sort of new hotspots coming up, or is it not yet because those are the sort of greenbelt sites potentially that need to be released?
Well, Merseyside is actually a really good example of a hotspot, or where there is a lot of activity at the moment. Ellesmere Port, for example, we've seen Firethorn invest in Ellesmere Port. We've seen PLP specking in Ellesmere Port. We've seen Red Sun spec developing in Ellesmere Port. Red Sun have let the unit they spec develop. Firethorn have submitted a planning application for a three-unit scheme on Port Cheshire. PLP, we believe, have got some very strong interest in the 2 units that they're specking in Ellesmere Port. And you've got Marshall about to push the button on a big box at Gauzy Bank in Widnes as well. So that, whether or not you would argue that Ellesmere Port and Widnes are traditional hotspots in inverted commas is for debate, but the fact of the matter is that I think over the course of the next 12 months, you'll see a lot of activity in those locations, and you'll see some really big deals done. The other location, and we've got a vested interest in it because we act for Caddick on Farrington Park up in Leyland, is this sort of M65, M6, M61 belt. If you look at Frontier Park in Blackburn, that is now with what we believe to be 200,000 square feet of the shed that's coming up, the two that are being built up there being under offer, if not let. That is now largely full. We put Science in Sport on there earlier this year. So Farrington Park in Leyland, we've already got some really good conversations going on with occupiers about that. We've got outline consent for it. So, you know, I've absolutely no doubt that if Caddick start their spec development before the end of this year, we'll see pre-lets on there, and we'll see most of that park flying out, because I think it's that stretch of the M6 certainly where there's actually a lot of chimney pots around there, heck of a lot of blue collar labour. Blackburn, Burnley, Chorley, Preston, all traditional blue collar industrial towns, and there's plenty of demand up there, as we've seen. So I think you'll see that Lancashire area, and Karen mentioned before that she also has a vested interest in that as well, so I think that's good news for all of us. And then you've got that sort of Merseyside over towards kind of Ellesmere Port, Widnes, Runcorn, that neck of the woods. I think that they will see a lot of activity over the next 12 to 18 months, and they will benefit from the hold up that there is with these other sites. So, you know, there is a positive knock on to that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Karen, I'd like to bring you in on this planning point. So over and above what Rob said about how, yes, there might be a sort of positive side to this sort of planning, you know, these planning hold-ups. It is nevertheless a big issue. You know, we heard earlier about the sort of potential sort of square footage that this could release, and that's sort of crucial for keeping the sector kind of stable and prices and competition and everything. Are you seeing that there is a sort of potentially counterproductive kind of national approach, which seems to sort of set a conflict between the growing need for industrial employment space and the desire to protect greenbelt and greenfield land?
I think
Is it for you?
We're getting a bit political there, Sarah. I think the challenge is, you know, and us as a company have generally worked on sites that are more allocated. So, you know, luckily we haven't had to deal with that controversy. Obviously, there's other businesses have done more of the strategic land approach, and it is something that we're looking at as well. I think having worked at Salford Council, it is always a challenge where I think that the jobs and the demand is very important. But I think sometimes as well for the residents, they'll have their views, won't they, in terms of big logistics and industrial locations near residential areas, but that can be all dealt with. So I think I don't really want to delve into the comment on that. I think it's possibly better for others. But I think one thing that is for certain, where there's been decline in other sectors such as retail and leisure, and we all, you know, we've all seen it ourselves during COVID. Sadly, we don't know what the outcome's going to be. I think a number of those jobs and skills are very transferable into industrial and logistics, and that could help in terms of, you know, reaccommodating those much needed jobs. But I think the locations, you know, need to be looked at, and, you know, always, you know, traditionally, and Rob alluded to it, and where Lancashire Central is, you know, on motorway junctions is your prime areas. But then with last mile logistics, you know, that's coming in a bit, isn't it, for some of the secondary areas, and I guess that helps in a different way. So it's a bigger remit. I know you've got the next session that I'll probably delve into that a bit more.
Sure, absolutely. Lisa, do you have anything further to say on the planning point? And I suppose, you know, how you guys in St Helens are trying to sort of ensure that the benefits of industrial schemes are communicated to central government and to the general public, and all of really the sort of stakeholders and decision makers involved.
As Karen said, I mean, it's a sensitive subject, isn't it? And, development on any greenbelt site is always sensitive. And councils absolutely have to listen to our local residents and have to hear what is being said. But it is a balance. It is a balance. We are in a post-pandemic world. We know that the economy is going to be hit hard, and we absolutely must do everything we possibly can to try to recover as quickly as possible. And particularly for those, sectors of the communities that have been hit the hardest. And so, how do we make sure that our challenged areas make sure that they have access to the jobs? So, I think it really is about local areas making local decisions for themselves and local people. And therefore, in St Helens, we are confident that by bringing forward the sites that we have earmarked in our local plan already, but bringing them forward, ahead of our local plan because of the need and the desire, and we are confident to stand behind that decision and defend that decision. But it is hugely frustrating at a time when, financially we are, we're facing some of the biggest challenges that we've ever faced, to have to pay the hundreds of thousands of pounds for planning and appeals. It is, and the time and the money that delay costs, really is, frustrating. But, I'm confident that, we've gone through the examination, we've stood up to that challenge, and I'm really confident that we'll be successful in those appeals.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Lisa. Joe, do you have any thoughts on this point? But also, I'd like to direct this question from our audience to you as well, because I know you mentioned this before this event when we were speaking about the sustainability point. We are going to explore this in detail in the second panel as well. But clearly the low carbon agenda is massive for all sectors of property, really, and industrial is sort of no different. And that's it's sort of responding both to developers' own objectives, isn't it? But also kind of what the end user, what the occupiers are looking for. So I wonder how you're addressing that within your company.
Yeah, I mean, sustainability is something, it's interesting. It's definitely more and more hot topic with investors that we're working with. Top of their agenda, sort of ESG initiatives are becoming more and more important. In years gone by, I mean, we've always delivered BREEAM buildings designed to secure BREEAM accreditation. And that's often been out of our own choice. Often people do it for funding or planning or whatever it might be, but we've always thought it was the right thing to do. And truthfully, it hasn't felt in the sector that we're working in the small to mid box sector with occupiers. It doesn't feel very important. I've probably lost count of the amount of times I've done a viewing, showing an occupier around, and they've talked about BREEAM and they've no idea what it is. So that's certainly one thing that we've done. Zero carbon and being zero carbon ready is something that people have talked about for a long time, but in many ways it's felt like token gestures have been made to try and have the sort of zero carbon ready badge or whatever it might be. And that's really because there's been no material effect on value, and obviously some of these things increase costs. So, but that I think is definitely changing and will change in the foreseeable future, whereby investors will be paying premium for sites and property that have green credentials. That's going to drive values up, and it's going to mean that developers are able to incorporate certain technologies, whatever it might be, into their buildings in order to secure those higher values and increase demand.
Okay, and what about the sort of costs to you then as a developer? Is this kind of sort of adding to, on top of the sort of higher investment costs, that we talked about earlier? Is this an additional cost, or do you? Yeah,
it will push. Anyway. It will push our bill costs up, and that's probably why you only see at the moment, sort of, in many ways, at the scale that we're working at, which is small to big box, is it's only token gestures, and they're not incorporated unless they absolutely have to be. We've talked already about how difficult it is to acquire sites, so it's all very well including these sort of technologies and assuming in your bids that your bill costs are going to be at a level, that are required to support these kind of measures. But if they're not necessary, then your co-bidders and that aren't assuming that these technologies are included, or they're not designing in this way, are just going to outbid you, and you're going to end up in a position where you've got no schemes coming forward. So that's the challenge. But I do think that is going to change. I do think it's obvious that investors will be paying a premium and desperately looking for places to place money that has the green credentials and ticks the box for them.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Joe. Got a couple more audience questions here. We've got. I'm going to address Alan Lamb's because it relates back to what we were talking about Greenbelt release and things. Do the panel think that an increased commitment to sustainable development would help assist sensible conversations on appropriate Greenbelt release? What do you think about that, Rob?
The answer is yes. I think it will do. I guess the difficulty is that it's a little bit chicken and egg. That I think you tend to find it's such a divisive topic, the issue of development in Greenbelt, that you've got those that think that all that's going to happen is there's just going to be these massive warehouses built that are going to have big filthy diesel trucks tipping up to it, and there may be a manufacturer on there kicking something out of a flue somewhere, compared to those of us in the industry that, as Joe's just alluded to, that are now firmly on board with the fact that we can no longer ignore this. It's here. People like me that might have been a bit cynical about it a few years ago, that idea now is just so prehistoric that we're all having to get on board with it, and rightly so, because the end user wants it, the end users investors want it, the clients investors want it, the developers want it, so it is here to stay. So I think it's still fairly new in terms of industrial development. So it's about ensuring that we educate the parties that are so against Greenbelt development that, well, look, listen, in actual fact, we're going to have some sustainable elements to this, whether it be in the materials we use, whether it be in the vehicles that are visiting the premises, whether it be how the park is set out, that I do think it will have that added impact and that added benefit. But I just think we've got a bit of work to do to probably educate some of the sort of people that are against Greenbelt development that is something that we as an industry not only can do, but I think more importantly want to do.
Just adding to that, I mean, it was an allocated site, Lancashire Central, we got the hybrid consent, and I appreciate it was a big box retail, but I view it in the same way as when we're going to look at big box industrial logistics. And I think it's, and I know it's different when it's Greenbelt, but I think it is trying, and Lisa will resonate with this, address, councillors and residents' views, how you mitigate that, how you can prove to them that you can do the screening. But I think also more importantly, and I think we're all in this because we'll all feel it for wherever we work at the moment, it's about the health and well-being of the staff as well. So I think when you have the ability to do a bigger development, you can put in those, green walking and cycling routes, and you can, help then sort of mitigate and work with the local residents in terms of how you're going to deal with these issues, how you're going to put in buffers, how you look at, and a lot of these businesses, they're not pumping out loads of smoke or anything like that, are they? It's all happening within the building, and it's sort of getting them to understand that, and the working hours and delivery, etc. And I know us as a company, we look at all of this very much because we're owned by a charitable trust, and through our own construction team, it's how you work through with recycling. We've upped our percentage of electric vehicles to over 6%, and as businesses are doing that, all of that can help in terms of, I'm not going to say, Lisa, get all of the problems away, but it's just how you do those steps, working with the whole design team, and listening to what people are saying and wanting.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Karen. So another audience question is from Phil Waring. With limited new development space, does the panel see a market in repurposing and upgrading existing stock? I wonder, Joe, is that That's something you'd like to answer. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, that's for me really. I mean, we've acquired 2 sites last week. I referred to one in Altrincham, which is 200,000 square feet of existing space, and one in Highton, which is 450,000 square feet of existing space. So our approach on both of those sites, or our strategy, will be to retain and repurpose some, if not most of the space. There will be some new development on there as well, but as I said before, when we've been bidding on these sites that are so sort of hotly contested, that there are sometimes greater margins to be made in, or greater difference in the margin between cost and value when you're repurposing or recycling buildings. So that's the approach that we've taken, and that's what's ultimately, I think, meant that we've been able to acquire these sites. I think it's something we're going to see more of. It's not new; it's been done for a while, but I do think there's a market for this space, and it's something that will be happening more in the future.
Are you seeing more of this, Lisa, in terms of sort of inquiries about this, sort of a desire to upgrade some of the existing stock, particularly in light of the sort of new land shortages?
I think you have to have that balance. I mean, and equally, as we are promoting green sites, we also absolutely have a passion for bringing forward our brownfield land and making sure that we use every part of our brownfield to the best of its effect. And I mean, very much in that green and sustainable process, repurposing existing properties is exactly what we should be considering to make sure that our carbon footprint is as low as we can possibly make it. So it's how can we as the council help people to do that? And I think it was clear, I think Karen mentioned there's a real market out there as well, because those locations have proven themselves to be right. If the buildings maybe are not fit for purpose now, how can we make them fit for purpose? Because the locations are already working. And I do think that digital connectivity will make a massive impact as well in those areas too.
Okay. Yeah, and as you say, sort of the infrastructure is there, isn't it, for those schemes? And okay, we've got 5 minutes max left of this discussion. So we've got 2 more questions from the audience that it would be great to get through. The first one is: developers in London are looking at multi-storey industrial logistics last mile hubs with soaring land prices in the northwest. Does the panel think multi-storey logistics will come to the northwest? Is an interesting one. I wonder who wants to tackle that one. Have you seen any inquiries on this front, Rob?
Not as yet, aside from obviously the Amazon model that we know and love. Not really. I think the challenges down in the southeast are more about, if you look at inside the M25, there's no land, regardless of whether you're talking about Greenbelt or whether you're talking about brownfield. There's just a real strain on land. Whereas up here, I think we're still exploring those opportunities where we can expand industrial areas. So I'm not saying that it won't be something that isn't considered at some point in the future, but I personally don't think we're quite there yet, which probably means that before the end of this year, we'll see a plethora of multi-storey logistics units in the northwest. But who knows? But no, I personally, I don't think we're quite there yet in the northwest. Okay.
Would either of our developers like to comment on that at all? What about your own appetite for developing that?
No, I'd agree with Rob. I'm not sure it's quite there yet, but let's see. But I'm happy to take the next question though from Mark at Leggett Owen. I think in my previous lives, and I think in terms of what we've done as a company, we've often built a lot of the smaller units, which has proved to be very good foresight in terms of where we are now, because we've held quite a lot in our portfolio. But I think for larger schemes, if you can accommodate those small starter incubator units, I know, speaking, and I'm sure Lisa, you're the same, a lot of the local authorities see that there is high demand in that. The challenge is in terms of viability, because the cost of those are often quite a lot higher, yet you're not necessarily commanding much higher rents, and also the lease terms are quite short. But it depends on how you want to manage that sort of property. And from our perspective as as a landlord, you know, we're okay with that. We're quite happy when things are management intensive. And in fact, there's an estate we bought actually in Oldham, just off the M60, where we did repurpose some of the buildings in terms of, you know, they were just not fit for purpose, and did some redevelopment, Victoria Trading Estate, which has traded really well. And that has worked well. Partly its location, I think, but also having that mix of product, and they were at that smaller end. So I think that is something that can be looked at, but it does have its challenges as a developer.
It is interesting though to sort of think about how industrial schemes could be kind of made sort of increasingly mixed use. You know, it's not because sort of it was traditionally, you know, as you said earlier, you know, chimney pots and factories. You know, you might not have wanted sort of startups might not have wanted to sort of sit next to that and get on with their work or whatever. But actually, you know, the sector has sort of grown so much that, you know, maybe there's an opportunity there. Is that something you've thought about, Joe?
In terms of mixed use schemes, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's something we're seeing.
Specifically this incubator space and small.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good idea that Mark's raised there, and I sort of share a similar experience to Karen, really, in that historically we did a lot of smaller space. A lot of it was grant funded, but the challenge really is viability, in that, yeah, proportionally your build costs are a lot higher, and it's not necessarily driving the same values. And that means, again, when you're trying to acquire sites, if you're looking at a site on that basis, you're often outbid by someone that wants to come along and stick one big box on it. So there's two ways of doing it. Either Mark's idea, I suppose, of an obligation on the developer to deliver something alongside, or some sort of additional subsidy or funding to put it more on a level playing field. In terms of the uses sitting alongside each other, I don't see there be any issue at all, really. I mean, something we talked about locations and new sites recently. There is obviously a shift to urban logistics, and whilst years gone by we may have just looked at motorway junctions for sites, I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. We've had ourselves sites that have been really, really well located on motorway junctions with good access to motorway junctions that haven't performed as well as more traditional urban logistics sites. So our site Raven Locks in Salford, for example, has done really, really well. But if you look at it from an access point of view, there is, you know, you're some way away from a motorway junction whilst it sits on the motorway. You have to drive through some houses to get there. So that's really, and that's been attractive to occupiers and investors, to those kind of sites. That's a trend that we're seeing, and that brings challenges with noise and traffic and roads and various other things through planning, which we're managing at the moment to deal with. So I really don't see. I think we're going to see more and more real mixed-use sites with residential and industrial sitting side by side. So I don't see any real issue with incubator space sitting alongside larger scale logistics.
Okay, thanks, Joe. And finally, Lisa, do you have any comment to make on this? And sort of, you know, it raises some interesting points about how to really capitalise on all of the kind of economic growth that's you know, the potential that's held in these schemes.
I think it's a great idea. I mean, I only wish it had been my idea, and I think it's definitely something we should write to government about. I'm not sure it'll be always welcomed by developers, but clearly there is a market out there. And often what's happened is that, as Karen said, I've got experience where councils had to step into that market, and because of that gap funding. And I know myself, I've been involved in a number of those small incubator schemes that have been hugely successful across the Northwest. I think one of the things is as well that we've seen a high rise in business startups during the pandemic. So clearly, you know, a lot of those people who've, you know, maybe had to be forced to change career into new areas, I think there really will be a latent market for that new property in probably the next 6 to 8 months. So I'm absolutely, I'd love to explore that. And I really think that having new incubator companies next to established ones, there's that really, you know, environment of making things actually happen and making things change as well, which benefits both. So yeah, that's like a great idea.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Lisa. So I think that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid, for this first panel. So a virtual round of applause to our speakers for a really thorough conversation, covered a lot of points, and we'll go into detail, even more detail, in some of these points in the next one. And to our attendees for your questions and input, please do keep them coming in the next one. Could I ask you for now to stay on for the networking break, and we'll be back for the second half panel at 11:25. So let's switch to networking mode, please, now, and thank you and see you all very shortly. Thanks for joining us again on the main stage. Our second panel of the day will hear more thoughts on trends and opportunities in the Northwest logistics and industrial sector, and also crucially examine ways of creating the right environment for future industrial growth and meeting occupiers' needs. So I'd like to welcome to the stage Steve Widdowson, Director of Caddick Developments, Hannah Richardson, Associate Director at Sporforths, Deborah Faithful, Estates Manager at Hermes, and Paul Martin, Development Director at Firethorn Trust. So if our speakers could activate their cameras and mics if they haven't already. And to our audience, don't forget to submit your questions through the Q&A button, and we'll get through as many of them as we can today. So we've got just under an hour, so we'll get going. To start with, welcome to you all. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Hi there.
Hi. So in our earlier panel discussion today, we heard about the current state of play in Northwest Industrial and a bit about the supply and demand dynamics that are driving and sort of influencing the market at the moment. So by way of introduction, I'd just like to ask each of you to share your main observation about the market at present and how it's affecting, either positively or negatively, your work or your involvement with the sector. In the case of Hermes, if you're lots of building projects as such. So Steve, would you like to go first?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask me to do that, Sarah. I will do, gladly. Yeah, thank you very much. And hello, everybody. So yeah, Caddick, we're a multi-sector developer, but heavily in our side, our DNA has been for many years is being an industrial and logistics developer across the north of England, but latterly across a wider part of the UK as well. So we develop sort of mid to big box, I suppose, is where we are. And we've got something like a 15 million square foot pipeline across both the Northwest and across Yorkshire. So that's sort of forms sort of oven ready schemes, a bit like Farrington Park, which Rob kindly mentioned earlier on, which has got a consent for about 600,000 square feet, and all the way through to sort of earlier large 4 million square foot schemes, which are sort of pushing through the planning process. So through the allocation process and then through outline and onto detailed and delivery. So a real mix, and that's our sort of modus operandi. Really, we try and find sites earlier in the process and use our in-house planning expertise and construction expertise to unlock sites, and so that's been pretty successful for us. But so general overview, but just to really echo the previous session, and I don't think everybody really knows where the market is. It's tough to, at the moment, and for a number of reasons, it's tough to keep up with it. Is one of the challenges. Certainly the level of occupier demand is has probably surprised everybody. Probably we all understand the reasons why, but it's making it challenging, particularly if you're trying to acquire at the moment. Trying to get the pricing right is something which I think Joe and Karen and Rob were alluding to. Pricing is difficult because really, if we're trying to use today's numbers, we're probably behind the curve, and so it's a challenge is getting ahead of the curve in order to transact. And from our perspective, trying to fund projects is difficult because we're in a reasonably fortunate position of sitting on the land. We haven't got the consent, or we're about to get the consent, so we're out there trying to find funding partners. And where do you where do you transact, what level do you transact, so that you can deliver a scheme, but also you're confident that you're not giving too much of the upside away. And so that's a challenge in a rapidly inflating market. It's tempting to sit and wait, but equally, that's not what we're about as a business. We're about delivery. So, getting funding partners and getting the transaction structure correct, so that you can feel confident to I suppose get a deal done, so you can get funding and get out in the market and try and take advantage of this occupational market, which we all know is pretty hot. So that's probably a challenge is for us is pricing when we're buying, and also when we're funding is pricing as well, because we are in a challenged environment in terms of decision making, I guess, around values.
Okay, great, thanks, Steve. Hannah, what about you?
Yes, I mean, we've heard in the first panel about this huge shortfall in ready available land has met a very, very busy and exciting time for us. We've been very busy. We've worked on a lot of the schemes. Actually, Lisa mentioned helpfully we were planning consultant on the Parkside scheme, so we're involved in the public inquiry. We've been working on Carrington. We secured permission for just over 500,000 square feet as part of a mixed-use development for Highmore last year. We've worked on the Glass Futures scheme for network space that Joe and Lisa mentioned earlier, as well as schemes in Crewe for PLP and Panettone, and the network space portfolio of urban logistics sites. So yeah, it's been a very busy period and challenging for planning, trying to keep up with the this unmet demand, very significant.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Paul, or other developer / investor in the room.
Hi, yeah, I think without kind of echoing what everybody else has said, it's tough to find sites at the moment, and I think logistics is one of the few sectors at the moment with tailwinds. So there's a lot of kind of money fleeing other sectors, looking for a place to hide, and that is affecting the kind of competition for sites, and it's just driving up land prices. And our kind of core spec, so we are an investor developer national, but our core spec is BREEAM excellent and net zero carbon, so that comes at a cost, and the profit cake is only so big. And so if you're having to pay for the ESG added goodies, and you're also having to pay inflated land cost, it often means, I'd say, potentially that you miss out on sites. So I mean, that's probably something that we can pick up later in the panel and further from the previous panel discussions. So we are finding it more and more challenging to identify sites that stack up.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Deborah, what about you and Hermes?
Yes, for Hermes, it's been an amazing year, obviously, as you can imagine. The COVID effect meant that we were categorized as an essential service from day one. We had to pivot our operations from home, for everybody working from home, and we did that in one day for customer services. And as part of the whole property portfolio that I helped to manage, we delivered a 5-year growth plan in 5 months in terms of acquisitions of new depots. We obviously had to adapt to our retail customers very quickly, offering flexible options, getting products on the shelves very quickly, and we were able to do this due to our technical capacity and infrastructure capacity. We had to look to increase automation in our depots. Obviously, they've been very traditionally manual. A significant work had been done to carry out and optimize the way we use our current depots, and using lean manufacturing techniques. And we upgraded 15 of our depots very quickly with new conveyors, which are our X belts, to meet with these increased volumes, and additional systems are now also planned for 2021. So basically, the volume of parcels went through the roof. As an example, in 2019, for peak week, The biggest number in per day parcels was 1.9. Roll that forward to 2020 and the parcel volumes was 3.4 million. So basically we doubled in volume within 1 year, and we tripled in profitability, which is great for Hermes. Our parcel shop volumes also doubled, which are our C2C depots, which is customer to customer. I put a parcel in a Hermes shop and it goes out to you as the customer, as my other end of the chain. We've got 346 parcels per shops per week equivalent now. We opened 4 new hubs, mainly in the Midlands, because obviously that's great for logistics, north, south, east, west. And we opened 9 new depots throughout 2020, and they went from Scotland in the north to Birchwood in Warrington, and another Sheffield, small one, and Tyneside, and right down to the southeast and the southwest, Weybridge and Thurrock. So we were very, very busy. We grew into a £1.5 billion business with the increased number of employees to 6,200 over the space of 1 year. So I think, for Hermes, it's been a very good year, and it's been extremely busy for the property department getting all these new depots over the line.
I bet. Thanks for that, Deborah. Okay, so thanks everyone for that sort of introduction to your work. Let's drill down into some of these points then in a bit more detail. Steve, looking at all of this, how do you think industrial real estate as a product is actually changing at the moment? You know, and how do you think this might play out over the coming year in terms of reflecting changing occupier demands?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of alluded to before. It's rapidly changing market, isn't it? And it's fascinating actually, because it's what we're seeing is bigger units as I suppose a response to both COVID and Brexit, and the online retailing, the shift away from bricks and mortar to online is making pushing occupiers to look for bigger and bigger buildings, and also taller buildings as well, we're seeing. So when I know Hannah will maybe touch on it, or when we get to the planning, is certainly a driver in the market is for taller buildings, which might take automation in a more efficient way, and just another feature of the market also we've noticed, is a number of freehold requirements. So there's a lot of buyers out there for bigger buildings, and that's a new feature in the market. And I guess that's possibly a response to the rental market inflating so quickly. If you've got cash, you're generating cash as a business, why would you buy into an inflating pricing structure if you can buy? So we're seeing that as a feature in the market, and also people occupiers getting into the development process a lot earlier, and in order to again avoid the mad rush for the up and let buildings, or sort of up and built buildings, trying to get in a lot earlier and talking to the likes of ourselves, and I'm sure Paul and others on the ways to accommodate them through the planning process, and again that'll avoid them I guess buying into an inflating pricing structure. So lots of things happening and changing, and to throw into the mix as well, the bigger units. There's always been a debate about where do you what size unit do you start cross docking. We're seeing a lot of bigger units are being single-sided as well, so just add a further complexity into the market. There's bigger units can be cross-docked, or they could be single-sided, and that throws up some challenges for master planning, obviously, and what do you spec. So a real cocktail there of moving parts, which just make the whole sector far more sophisticated and complex now than it ever has been. And in terms of the future, I don't know if you want to talk about that now. We'll come on to it, but I just see this. I just see the market getting more and more sophisticated, particularly when we're beginning to bend our heads to is office content. The research suggests that the office proportion inside the logistics and industrial is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So what does that mean for the quality of that office space that you're building inside those buildings, and on bigger schemes? And I think Karen mentioned it in the earlier panel, how you master plan and make sure that you're thinking about all these aspects. So in short, a very, very long way of saying it's getting far more sophisticated as a product, and challenging developers to think far more laterally and think ahead. Actually, you've got to really be thinking ahead in a rapidly changing market.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Steve. That's really interesting. Paul, I wonder if you've got anything to add to that in terms, from the developer's point of view, whether there's any other characteristics, I guess, in terms of spec that are sort of increasingly coming forward that maybe weren't before.
I think so. And it'd be good just to pick up on Steve's point on the office content, because I think lots of these bigger buildings, actually companies are using them effectively as their head office. So they do want more office space, but it's also a higher quality office space. It's not kind of an ancillary warehouse office space. It's a kind of a really high quality finish that they want for their, to wow clients and keep their staff happy. So, some of the finishes that we are looking at is a kind of office product that would stand up in a city centre as a standalone office. It's a kind of a different product, I think, than what maybe has been provided historically. On the kind of, I think ESG is the other kind of spec change that is kind of, it's a hot topic at the moment, but it is changing how we are kind of specifying our end product. Solar panels, battery storage, battery ready, EV charging for cars, EV ready for electric vehicles. I mean, we're doing that, or we're trying to do it, and that's because we might hold the product. We're not necessarily going to trade it. So we're taking a longer term view that maybe these products will be less liquid if they're not seen as green in the medium long term. And I think, as time goes on, that will become more and more important, and it will affect values of up and built stock. So, that's why one of the reasons why we're looking at it, not the only reason. So I think that is fundamentally changing the kind of the delivery and the specification of buildings.
Absolutely. Okay, thanks, Paul. And yeah, lots of good points that we'll pick up on in a bit. Deborah, I mean, you're sort of at the forefront of this in terms of driving, a lot of these demands, these changes. You mentioned earlier that Hermes is ultimately responding to customers' growing expectations of e-commerce. They order something, they want it delivered now. That's been kind of all the more important during the pandemic. So what does this mean for you guys in terms of what you're looking for in logistics property and where it needs to be located? And also you mentioned this automation. Perhaps you can give us a few examples of actually what this automation looks like in terms of the characteristics of the buildings, just to give us, it's sometimes hard to imagine, isn't it, exactly what this involves, other than to imagine lots of robots wandering around.
Well, I can give you an example. Well, first of all, in terms of automation, we don't have any fully automated warehouses in Britain at the moment, but I do know that we would need 68,000 minimum square feet of warehouse space to make it worthwhile putting the investment required into the unit. In terms of our latest unit, which is Bolton, just going back, I think, to the lack of scarcity as well, we didn't have a lot of choice when we found our new Bolton, which is being built at the moment by Panettone. And that is 77,000 square feet with about 6,000 of offices. And as Paul referred to earlier, those offices will be smart. It is our CEO's nearest depot to where he lives. So no doubt he'll be visiting a lot and having his boardroom meetings there. We've gone for quite a snazzy first floor with windows everywhere, so they can actually, clients coming or customers coming can actually see into the warehouse depot. the actual model of the operation as it stands when they're sitting around the boardroom table, which we feel will be, you know, brilliant in a new building, as the flagship of the North will be. But yes, from our point of view, we have a prototype of what we look for in terms of the design. I think Paul was saying one-sided, or was it? Sorry, Steve. But we are, as a logistics delivery company, we are wanting 2 sides, preferably 3 sides of loading elevations. And if we can, we always have a Bolton type design for our new depots when they are design and build. We either go design and build or second hand, that's a different story. But on the design and build side, we would want 3 sides of elevation loading with about 30 doors on 3 sides. That gives us a lot more parcel volumes to be going out. So instead of 180,000, which is what our Nottingham, which is 2 sides of elevations, 180,000 parcels per day, we can get 220,000 out of a 3-sided elevation building. At the moment, I think the automation, fully automation, is still being looked at. So I don't actually know what it's like because I've not seen it yet. But it's I think there's a lot of, it's going to cost a lot of money to automate, and they need to see that will bring the profits back. At the moment, I think the concentration is other innovations within the company, and also obviously we've got this massive new depot infrastructure to acquire over the next 3 years.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. Just before we move on to Hannah, I wonder if you could tell us just a bit about, you mentioned how, you know, the Midlands for you is a big area because, you know, easy access in all directions, but also you've just going to have your sort of HQ in Bolton. What are the sort of key advantages of the Northwest for you guys?
So the Northwest obviously is a massive conurbation of lots of big cities. Our hubs are all in the Midlands. Our depots are all over the country. So basically, if John Lewis send a parcel, it'll go into one of our hubs, which are all based in Rugby or Warrington, Nuneaton, because from the hubs they can go out to all the depots around the country. At the moment, we will be looking for a new Coventry, a new Birmingham, a new Crewe, a new Liverpool, a new Wolverhampton. You can see how much expansion we're doing in the Northwest because of the amount of people that live there. Stands to reason, doesn't it?
Okay, yes, so it's very much about being where the customers are, being close to the customers are, sort of all across the country, including the Northwest.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. All right, Hannah, so in terms of what you're seeing in terms of the planning of industrial schemes, are some of these sort of changing specs being reflected in the applications that you're handling and that you're sort of seeing going through? You know, can you sort of detail any of this automation and sustainability features in terms of what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, automation's a key sort of factor in the outward appearance of some of the buildings that we're working on. So obviously automation means much taller buildings traditionally. So rather than being, I don't know, between 15 and 22 metres for sort of more standard building, automation generally means sort of 40 metres height-wise, which in terms of visual impact, which is a key issue for planning applications, is a, you know, it's a challenge. It's something that we need to pay close attention to and make the case for, you know, to promote the scheme. So yeah, automation is quite a big factor in some of the changes that we're looking at and the schemes we're working on across the north of England at the moment. I think, you know, going on to your next point about sustainability is a really, you know, I think the sector's got an important role to play. I think Joe touched it on in the earlier panel. There's kind of a bit of a step difference. I think some of the bigger logistic developers are really embracing sustainability, and they're making an increasing commitment to it. They're signing up for BREEAM Excellent and net carbon. Zero carbon, sorry. Whereas I think the sort of the mid market is slightly lagging behind. That, you know, they don't see the value of it. So I think it's down to, you know, different companies and how they aspire to use and their vision of the building, really.
Okay, thanks, Hannah. We'll flesh out some more of the sort of planning issues in a bit. But I'm actually at this point going to bring in an audience question from Rob Trevitz for Deborah while we're talking about the zero carbon agenda and so on. What is Hermes' view on ECG? Is this becoming more and more important as it is for investors? And then are you also starting to look at wellness for employees and how that might be incorporated into some of the big industrial schemes?
So in terms of ESG, we've got a new head of environment, social and governance coming and starting in May, who's basically going to be coming from John Lewis to advise us. So that's how seriously we're taking it. There is a lot of wellness within the intranet in terms of Hermes at the moment, and also in terms of the depot. We're trying to introduce as much light as possible, so people have as much access to natural light. In terms of the depots actually being built, we will obviously try to make them as sustainable as possible and as nicer working environments as possible. And compared to some of the old ones that we've got that are coming to the end of their natural life and will be moving to bigger ones, the key is all about staff retention and looking after the well-being of our staff.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. Okay, Steve, we were talking, I can't remember if it was you or Paul, but one of you mentioned that kind of ultimately with all of this, industrial property is getting bigger. It's getting larger, it's getting taller, as Hannah said. And so the sites required are potentially larger. And we heard in the first panel session about the acute shortage of land to deliver the property needed to meet market demand, and then subsequent issues with large schemes being called in by the government and so on. We're still waiting for decisions on that. So do you think the size issue is a key factor in the controversy of some industrial projects? And how does the sector navigate this, really, given all of these new requirements on the buildings?
Yeah, well, it's not making life any easier. that's for sure. So it's yeah. I mean, these bigger schemes are obviously as we see the shift from employment away from bricks and mortar retailing into, I suppose it's moving into a different form of retailing, which is more distribution focused, but it's sort of driven by the same spend, consumer spending. So, but it's moving into a different place. So there's several conflicts being set up, aren't there, between the size of the buildings and the shift of employment away from centres. I mean, we're so early in this, we don't know how that's going to look post-COVID, but certainly there's a shift away from centres in some way, shape or form, and that means buildings that, you know, I suppose in traditional industrial locations are getting bigger and more sophisticated and with the more demands. So, and one of the issues in our heads, one of the issues with the white paper is it's really residential focused. It's a residential piece. It's not an employment piece, and so not enough thought or understanding has gone into the changes in the sector. But now, to be fair, on the planning system, I mean, I'm finding it hard enough to keep up with what's happening in the sector right now, and everybody is. So to expect the planning system to understand it is probably a little bit unfair and actually, you know, unreasonable. So in order to manage these challenges, there needs to be some education as to what the benefits of the sector are, and I think again Rob alluded to it earlier, and there's quite a lot of a bit of a blind spot in the planning system about the benefits of logistics and the types of jobs and the quality of those jobs and how they're changing. And to me, we need to start collaborating. The systems need to collaborate with each other rather than be adversarial. I think it's a little bit adversarial at the moment, and I don't want to get into the various war wounds we've got from development control issues we have with, and it's not just the planners actually, because I think most planners, in my experience, you know, they're good, they're professional, they're good, and they're trying to get the job done against a very, very challenging a resource challenge for themselves, and also, you know, the green belt is a hot political topic. It occupies to my mind, sometimes it occupies a place in the national psyche, a little bit like, you know, the First Amendment in the United States. You know, it's that emotive, and so, you know, the planning system is trying to battle with that at the same time, and so. The question was, how do you resolve that? Because we are heading for a conflict in this, and I think it's got to go back to the ESG points, and I think the BPF did some really good work on this. I'd advise people or encourage people to read it. It's redefining real estate agenda, which is all about, I suppose, put the development business putting itself forward in a better light in order to have a more productive conversation with the planning system and with communities about how we solve these problems together. Because I think we have to collaborate and not fight. And maybe there's a new, throw it out there as an idea. You know, there's a new body set up which is made up of planners and planning consultants and responsible developers, and we try and set an agenda and try and set some best practice as to how we go about moving forward, because it's not going to this isn't going to go away. It's here to stay, and you know, we have to find a way through it. And developers are good problem solvers. You know, that's one thing we are good at doing is solving problems and thinking laterally. We do it, you know, 20 times a day. So, you know, there's I think let's be positive. Let's try and start working together and not against each other, and start trying to find some answers against what is a very, very difficult political backdrop. And we get that, but we want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Hannah, what are your thoughts then on this sort of apparent planning conflict between sort of the need for industrial growth and some elements of the planning system and some elements of sort of national or local policy? Why is that occurring, and what's the solution?
Oh, an easy question, Sarah, to answer. And I mean, I think Steve touched on something very interesting, that, you know, last year's white paper referred to, you know, the need for over 300,000 new houses each year, but it was silent on this sector, even with, you know, the impact of COVID on this sector has been huge, and it's likely to increase. It's very strange that the government it wasn't mentioned at all. You know, the NPPF refers to a strong and competitive and responsive economy, but it doesn't give us the tools to do that. You know, the current system it doesn't allow straightforward planning. You know, it's not a straightforward planning application. Most of the sites are what we've talked about in the green belt. We have to demonstrate very special circumstances. We have to look at alternative sites and do alternative sites assessments. And all these things are they can be challenging. They delay program and they add costs. There is also the risk of call-ins that we've had with, you know, the Parkside and the other schemes that we've talked about. So I think the planning system as it is at the moment, there's a real lack of ability to respond to the scale and locational needs of the sector. We need to try and change it to keep up with demand. How we do that? Do we think about, you know, regional tiers of you know, planning decision making? I do think, picking up on what Steve said as well, there's a real need to educate politicians, officers, and general members of the public of the benefits of the sector. I think, you know, there's still a perception that you know, these big sheds are empty with one man on a forklift, and, you know, the range and the quality of these jobs, you can have a whole career in logistics. You can start out, you know, very junior position and end up being a management, you know, and I think Deb will probably correct me, but I think the national wage in logistics is £6,000 above the national average wage. So that, you know, the good wages, they're mainly full-time jobs, and so the quality of the jobs created is a huge winner, particularly in a post-COVID world when we've got such high unemployment. So really selling the benefits of some of these schemes and trying to educate sort of, you know, members and politicians is probably a key thing. But yeah, I think a more streamlined planning system and a quicker process is key. haven't got the answers, unfortunately, how we do that. But I think it's like Steve said, it's a conversation. It's trying to, we all need to do this together and to try and deliver this huge unmet demand.
Thanks, Hannah. I think that's really interesting. I mean, just in terms of sort of, I appreciate we don't all have the solutions. That's why we're here, kind of, discussing all of this. But what do you think about? I think it was Parkside possibly that is looking at this, mitigating sort of loss of greenfield or biodiversity sites by creating a whole big new park and things like that, and new wetlands or things. Do you think that's feasible, or do you think we're sort of back at the same place where we're short of land anyway available? So.
No, I think there's a real, I'm working on a big scheme in Leeds, and we've created a whole new development. At the minute, it's private agricultural land, and part of the site is being opened up. It will be part of the SUDS solution, but there'll also be new footpaths created and better links to the community and residential areas. So I think there is a bit more about the benefits to local people. I think that really helps us sell schemes to what are the benefits. So I think there is absolutely a role there, and the more we can do and demonstrate the benefits, so it's not just jobs, it's the environmental benefits and the quid pro quo of what local residents are going to have as a result of this scheme. I think that really helps deliver a successful planning process.
Sure. Okay, thanks, Hannah. Now, Paul, you said before this session that on the planning side, you'd actually found your experience was that it was refreshingly straightforward in your words. What is it about your schemes that are going through so easily? Do you think?
Well, I think I'd love to just pick up on the Greenbelt point first, because I think there's been some really good points by Steve and Hannah on it. I personally think it's a public opinion issue. As Steve said, it's like this kind of second amendment thing in the States, is people see the Greenbelt as some kind of holy shrine, area that should never be touched. But really, 50 years ago or whenever, they were just drawn on a map around cities. So it's not all green space. It's just, it was kind of allocated to protect urban sprawl. And then since then, motorways have been put through and all kinds of other things. So, in terms of logistics, all you're looking at really is, well, I'm probably being general on the bigger box stuff, but you're looking at motorway junctions. So for me, if you use common sense, that's not valuable green space. That's already been degraded by the motorway when that was put in after the Greenbelt was designated. So if you use common sense, you'd say, right, we'll take this area and use it for employment, because it's one of the few areas that can service this function, but we will designate some Greenbelt elsewhere. That's a beautiful field or forest or whatever. To me, that makes sense. That's just logical. So personally, I think it's education to the public, because the politicians fear the public reaction. So I don't think in the councils and planning committees they are less worried about Greenbelt, I think, but they are worried about the voters and what will happen to them if they consent something in the Greenbelt. So for me, the effort needs to be in public opinion and actually educating them. And this is Greenbelt, but it's right next to a motorway junction. It's not that valuable. We will replace it with some valuable land in a good location. I think that would be my solution if I was in charge.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I wonder about so coming back to the low carbon agenda as well, and this pressure on developers to make their schemes as sustainable as possible. I think you mentioned before we spoke as well that is really helping to get those kind of characteristics in schemes is helping to get even big industrial schemes through. Obviously, a lot of these schemes do require an awful lot of power, and I think this adds to the size element as well, and the kind of general infrastructure needs of these projects. Is that a challenge or an opportunity at the moment?
I think the PowerPoint is a challenge, because we just occupiers are asking for more and more power, and it feeds into this automation point, plus the kind of planning regulations are saying you need to start providing EV charging. That's only going to go up. Tenants are also asking for future proofing for kind of commercial vehicle charging. So all of that power, especially if like us, your spec building, you don't actually know what the occupier is going to want. So you have to kind of try and provide enough to cover all eventualities. So, lots of sites actually require significant offsite reinforcement. So you're having to upgrade power cables for, up to 2 kilometers in public highway just to upgrade the power to the site, which can run into millions of pounds of additional cost.
Wow. Okay. Thanks for that, Paul. I'm just going to go to some audience questions now. We've got one at the top. Giles Scott. Interesting observations about offices. This was, I think, partly related to Deborah's comments about sort of, the new office potentially for Hermes within Bolton, but also, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Giles, whack some more comments on the Q&A thread, but we were discussing in the first panel about how actually with schemes becoming larger and things, offices might well be smaller or a different kind of spec. There's the potential for some squeezing there. He says, additionally for spec, folk tend to assume 5%. Is it time to change? Steve, I wonder if you want to address that one.
I was going to ask Deborah that question.
Deborah, we can ask you as well.
10%.
I think trying to, this is the difficulty, isn't it, of speccing actually, because we've already highlighted all sorts of conflicts. Deborah was talking about three-sided for parcel delivery, and we've got experience of demand for big single-sided and cross-docked, and 10% office content, 5%. It's just making the spec decisions even harder. But there are other ways that you can build a little bit of flexibility into the buildings. And I know we've put first floor offices in on a mezzanine level, and then you can drop down below to increase the content fairly quickly and fairly easily. So there are methodologies, there are ways you can build some flex into the office content, but it's I suppose as buildings get bigger, then the proportion of the cost of the office space gets bigger and starts to skew the numbers, and so that decision gets harder and harder and harder actually, and so it's a challenge. Yes, it's something that as when you're designing, going through a detailed design phase, or even before that, we're relying heavily on Rob Taylor to tell us where the market is and where we should be doing, but and as Paul said before, whatever you do when you're speccing a building, you'll be hedging your bets in some way, shape, or form, because you're trying to guess what an occupier might want. So, but in a COVID, I don't know. It'd be interesting one for, as I said, to get Deborah's view. I suppose spacing is more and more important in a post-COVID world. So, does that mean that you're now thinking you need more space? Are you happy to live in air-conditioned building, office building, or a naturally ventilated building? How's that going to work? I guess is where we are right now in our thinking, in our designing. What are these office spaces going to look like? How big? And what's how are people going to be occupying them?
Absolutely, thanks, Steve. Deborah, do you want to come in on that? You said 10%.
Yeah, well, I mean, we go for 10% at the moment, but what that includes is a big canteen. So if we take a spec building, say that Steve's built and it's already ready, it usually has a first floor with an undercroft, and in that undercroft we will put a transport office and a big canteen and locker rooms, and maybe another office, shower, etc. The first floor will be divided into smaller offices and breakout areas. Every depot manager is different, and they have their own ideas of what they want to see in their depot, so to speak. And even though we've got a prototype, they still like to twiddle with it and tweak it and say, no, I don't want 2 offices, I want one big one, etc. But that's how if we're designing from scratch, we get absolutely what we want. If we're taking one that's already built, which we are doing at the moment, then we will add and adapt what's already there. But obviously we've got to provide eating facilities for our workers that are going through the night on that. But yeah, the working environment is important. Just try to make the offices as smart and as pleasant to come into as possible. But obviously in our business now, a lot of people are working from home. Head office is actually in Morley. But a lot of people can't go and work at a depot too if they're traveling that way for meetings, etc. So they will always choose the ones that are the nicest ones to work in and go there, to the point where you go, there's too many people coming in, and obviously distancing is very much at the forefront of what we're thinking about in terms of, people have got to be kept safe.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, there's a question for you, Deborah, from Chris Webb. How does Hermes or how will the occupational needs change given acceleration of the e-commerce sector and demand for space for distribution and delivery? And how can developers evolve their product? I mean, you sound like you're already kind of looking at how Hermes' future sort of needs might change. You're already kind of halfway through that process, really, aren't you? You're already, with these new builds that you're looking at, the Bolton one with Panettone, you're trying to factor in some of those future demands, aren't you, into those schemes? But yeah, are there any other kind of characteristics that haven't already been mentioned?
The main thing is we're always called yard greedy. So we love our yards and we like them to be as enormous as possible. And that rules out a lot of institutional buildings because they're not, the building is lovely, but the yard is not big enough. What we end up doing then is taking a much bigger building just to get the right size yard. So if you think of a third of the floor plate is the building and 2/3 is the yard, 50-metre yard minimum, wrap around if possible, in one way, out the other. These are lorries coming every day of the week, all year round, except Christmas day and some Sunday afternoons. So the yard thing is crucial. We need 6 acres. We've taken a lot of bigger second-hand buildings because we get the yard, and obviously because they're second-hand, they are cheaper per square foot. So we've got a mixture this year of new build and of second-hand properties, but the second-hand properties tend to be as big as 150,000 square feet when we actually only need 80,000 in a building, but we can't get the yard. So we have to go bigger. The institutional, but say for instance, for Bolton, there was a list of this long of buildings that were new build, but when you actually took them out that didn't have the big enough yard, you were left with basically, and somebody on this panel knows what I'm talking about, we were left with 2 real choices of a new build, giving us the right yard in the whole of the Bolton sort of northwest Manchester area.
Wow. Okay. I mean, given that, it raises questions about the future of industrial in terms of spec. Like, how do you think occupiers will increasingly just, want their own, all of this sort of going into existing buildings? It just might not work anymore. It's going to be all about trying to build new ones and much harder to retrofit or sort of, upgrade other ones.
Well, so we've got a Tyneside requirement. There is a second-hand building that might well suit, and the rent might be cheap enough to make it worthwhile, that we're taking a lot more actual building space than we need because we'll get this enormous yard with it. But again, we've got to put loads more doors in, and doors are 20,000, 20,000 a door. You've got to add that in for the developer or the investor. And like somebody said earlier, there's massive interest in buying freehold industrial buildings at the moment with blue chip tenants in, because there is it's just the new market, isn't it? It used to be retail and now it's industrial. That's sort of the biggest area of financial opportunity. But yeah, so we will always prefer to find a second-hand building with a massive yard and put some doors in if we can make it work, because it's cheaper per square foot usually. But you would think that there would always be loads and we could choose loads. That was 5 years ago. Now there isn't loads and everybody wants them, and we're just obviously up against not only other logistics companies but other online retailers that have gone much bigger because of their online retail presence. So that it's quite competitive for us to get a unit these days without us having to bid against somebody else. But on the other hand, when you're building design and build, and you've got, say, I mean, we're doing one in the south at the moment where there is a massive site. They need about 10 tenants there. They'll be very happy to have us there as one of the 10 tenants. That ticks one of their boxes. They've got 9 others to get rid of. That's fine. We can do a deal with them. So it depends on the area of the country, but the Northwest is a really tight area.
Okay, it's really interesting. Thanks, Deborah. Hannah, what do you make of this? I mean, it feeds into the sort of land shortage issues, doesn't it? But what do you think about the potential, the opportunities there for sort of upgrading existing stock to try and sort of, you know, resolve some of these land issues, or do you think really it's sort of it's not enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. I think, as Deborah said, it's just finding the right fit for clients and tenants, and it's quite a difficult task. I think there's always a perception that there's lots of empty units and they can be returned into something else. But it's sometimes a challenge finding the right fit in the right area, because as Deborah said, there's certain characteristics for every business are very important. So it doesn't come along very often. But I think urban logistics is, yes, a huge potentially an opportunity there. I think it was also interesting, it's not necessarily connected to this, but it's almost the future of our high streets and our town centres as well. You know, the increase as a result of COVID in retail online means that our town centres are going to look very different places, and we're going to have a lot of empty shops. So can they be repurposed for last mile logistics? You know, what are they going to look like? So there's a whole and how does that work? And you know, it's getting into, so there's a whole, so it's all a chain effect really, isn't it? And it's very interesting to see how it could turn out.
Deborah's shaking her head there.
Well, only because, I mean, I also do a lot with our delivery units, as we now call them. These used to be called sub-depots, but I mean, in the trade, that's last mile delivery units. And again, very, very yard greedy. We've got the busy, mornings with hundreds of couriers turning up to take parcels away. Your average retail shop does not have the right backyard for us, and we certainly wouldn't want to be upsetting all the neighbours next door by far too many. And remember, our couriers are self-employed, so they'll turn up in whatever they can find to drive that they can get insurance for, and we don't want them necessarily to be driving into neighbours' car parks as well, because there isn't enough room in our own. So we have been approached by several retail park specialists, so to speak, that are thinking of repurposing their empty retail shops. But unless they can keep us away from the general public in an enclosed yard, we don't necessarily want to be next to anybody else on the high street for our sub-depots. And so we'll take them on industrial estates. We need to be away from resi as well. I mean, these lorries are coming through the night. There's no good having flats above shops with us at the back, because they'll be complaining, obviously, and we would be upsetting their night's sleep. So yeah, we have been approached. At the moment, we can't see how that would work unless it's a really big retail estate with some land at the back. That might work. That's how I see it.
It's interesting though, Deborah, what you're saying though, so about sort of this competition really. You're facing it from other occupiers as well, whilst in the first session we were talking just very much about like the investment competition and things. So yeah, I wonder what our sort of two developers in the room sort of make of this and this discussion about the repurposing and everything. Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a nice idea, but I think, well, from what I'm hearing, and obviously Deborah's the expert, but from what I'm hearing, it's actually going to be quite difficult to implement, because you're kind of solving one problem but not very well, so you get a kind of an end product that just doesn't function very well. It might be at 80% efficiency, or so I don't think that it's a long-term solution. On the face of it, it looks like a good idea, and it would be a nice way to solve this kind of retail logistics kind of movement, but I just don't think it's going to play out that way.
Okay, fair enough. Steve, any thoughts to add?
Not really, other than to say clearly it's got to it has a place in the market, doesn't it? And repurposing stock is a sensible thing to be doing, but it's not going to in and of itself solve the problem. It's always going to be in the mix, and it's got a place. And I've done it in previous life, and I'm sure Paul has, and it works fine. But it's it'll soak up a little bit of demand, which is got to be a good thing, hasn't it? Because hopefully it'll mean that there's less pressure on the on development land for where we should be maybe focusing on bigger units and making sure Deborah gets what she needs. But it's a place in the market, and that's good. It's got to be a good thing if it can work.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. I was thinking actually when Deborah was talking about the high streets and how you don't want to annoy people and also increase traffic in a sort of high street and I mean, Hannah, the roads and sort of infrastructure issue and the sort of serving of these sites is really important, isn't it? We haven't really talked about that so far in this session, but we've got actually quite a few kind of controversial road schemes trying to go through. There's the sort of new Port of Liverpool one. That's sort of not sort of stalled at the moment, isn't it? I think they've launched a further round of consultation about it, but they're potentially exploring alternative options because actually this has raised other greenbelt issues because it would cut through a park. Where do you think the gaps are in terms of infrastructure provision for some of the big industrial sort of sites at the moment, and is that a further challenge?
It is. I mean, most of the schemes we work on, the impact on infrastructure is a significant issue to overcome as part of the planning application process. You're normally looking at sort of strategic road network junctions. They're at capacity, so it is a huge challenge to try and overcome, and it's working with other bodies that you're not always in control of, Highways England and other things. So yeah, it's an that is a tricky part of the sector. And it's trying to find a solution. Very often, we work on schemes where we come in with a solution and we can sort of ride on, we can deliver a solution to an issue that then opens up a development and a development for this kind of, for employment. So we kind of try to want to be the solution rather than the problem is what we try and do sometimes. I'm not too familiar with some of the ports in Liverpool, but it makes sense that logistics and the employment sector want to be in proximity to these, the deep water ports and the strategic rail infrastructure and on the strategic highway network. So these are all key considerations and really are important to these kind of schemes.
Can I just come in there, Sarah,
Sure.
just to sort of amplify that point? I mean, going back a step, let's say we win the hearts and minds battle on the planning arguments, and so we're basically winning a political argument in order to move the planning system forward. But that still leaves behind all the other statutory consultees, which we have to deal with as developers. Highways England, Environment Agency. There's lots of them, and there's about to be another one. Active Travel England, I gather. So they still need to be engaged with, and they haven't got the same political motivations or the same political pressures. And so when we talk about planning, we're not just talking, in my head, we're not just talking about planning officers and members. We're talking about the whole suite of consultees that need to be dealt with, and make sure that they're responding in the right way and in a timely fashion, which sometimes we don't see. And that again, it's part. The planning orbit is a lot bigger than just the planning officers and the ward members. It goes a lot further than that, and just makes our job even more challenging sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely, sure. Paul, you look like you want to comment on that.
I'd just be interesting to hear other people's kind of experience on planning, because I think we touched on obviously the more strategic stuff, the greenbelt releases. And as I kind of said previously, all of our sites are effectively allocated, so our planning battles are much smaller than maybe some of other people's planning battles. But what I've found is that actually local authorities, where a site's allocated for employment, are now super helpful to us. And I think part of that is the whole kind of zero carbon, and that's a good news story that they can sell politically. And then the other part of it is the kind of employment genuine need that there is in most of the country now. So I'm just curious as to whether or not that's just we've been lucky, and actually the local authorities we've been dealing with have been good ones, or if that is everybody else's experience.
Yep. Well, hopefully, I mean, it looks like we're going to have to wrap up there. So I'm minded to end on a sort of positive note, Paul,
Okay, that's fine.
Presented us with, unless anyone else wants to, have a final point. Deborah, you had your hand
I was
up?
just going to say that
About 1 minute.
we were waiting for the planning to come through on Bolton, and it was taking longer than was predicted, to the point we're still waiting 2 months later. And in the end, we put together a letter to the council saying we were offering employment of 200 more people, because we're only moving from the old one across the road to the new one, but we're still going to employ 200 more people on the back of that. And that seemed to be the magic word, 200 more people employed. And all of a sudden it was signed off. I don't know what the hell that was, but it seemed to work. So
yeah,
employment.
Yeah.
It's always important, and maybe more so at the moment, with the higher levels of unemployment. So yeah, and I guess it's about also tailoring that to the individual locality that you're in as well, sort of skills matching and things like that. Yeah, really interesting. There's so much going on, so much that you're all grappling with and succeeding on. So yeah, really great discussion. Gonna call it to an end now, and then there'll be another half an hour for hopefully you guys and everybody else in the room, all of our delegates, to have a bit of a chat and thrash out some of these ideas and points. So yeah, thank you so much to our speakers for your comments and views, and to our audience for your questions and input as well. Thanks again to our sponsors, JMW Solicitors, Lexington Communications and AEW Architects. Please do stay around for this next half an hour and continue making contacts and doing business. Our next Place Northwest event will be the Lancashire Development Update on 22nd of April. You can register for that via our website, placenorthwest.co.uk. Thanks so much again for coming today, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.